It was the last day of December 2025, and the world was busy winding down from the holidays, sipping leftover Christmas wine, and counting down the hours until a brand new year began. Nobody really expected the Prince and Princess of Wales to do anything unusual. They were on a family Christmas break, tucked away somewhere private, resting after what had been an extraordinary and emotionally loaded year. The royal calendar had been officially cleared, and there were no events scheduled, though no press calls arranged, no palace announcements expected. And yet, in the way that the best surprises always arrive, quietly, without fanfare, without warning, something landed on the internet that stopped people mid-scroll. Their official Instagram account, followed by millions across every continent, lit up with a new post. It wasn't a formal statement, which it wasn't, a carefully worded message from a communications team. It was, well, something far warmer than that. It was pretty much on a carousel of 12 photographs, one for each month of the year that was almost over, every single one of them previously unseen by the public. Images that had never been published anywhere. Moments that had existed, until that evening, only in private. The caption underneath read simply, "Some unseen favorites from 2025. And beneath that, their New Year message. Happy New Year to everyone around the world. Thank you for a brilliant 2025, and looking forward to 2026. That was it. No, well, a grand speech. No elaborate statement. Just 12 pictures and a handful of words. Within hours, the post had collected over 300,000 likes. The comment section became something close to a flood. People were writing from Argentina, from India, from the United States, from tiny towns in England that most people have never heard of. They were writing in Spanish and Portuguese and English, and languages that the platform's algorithm could barely identify. They were saying actually to things like, "I love you guys so much," and 2025 was definitely a wonderful year. One day, you'll be an amazing king and queen. A fan from Argentina wrote directly to the couple, telling them the entire world loved them. Another commenter, apparently still thinking about one particular moment from the collection, declared that there needed to be more events featuring William playing volleyball on a beach. So the tone of the whole comment section wasn't the usual mix of admiration and minor controversy that tends to follow royal social media posts. It was something simpler. It was joy. To understand why these 12 photographs hit people so hard, it helps to understand what kind of year 2025 had actually been for Catherine and William. Because on the surface, it looked like a year of triumphant comeback and royal duty carried out with grace. But underneath that surface was something that made every single public appearance they made feel a little bit heavier, a little bit more meaningful than it might have otherwise. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had spent most of 2024 hidden from the world. A cancer diagnosis, kept private for months, had pulled her out of public life entirely. The world had watched and worried and speculated. And then finally, in a message she delivered herself, in a video filmed in a garden, and in her own words, learned the truth. For what it's worth, she had been ill. She had been treated. She had fought through it. And as 2025 began, she stood on the other side of something enormous. The first image in the New Year carousel reflected exactly that weight. It was from, January, and it showed William and Catherine together at a Holocaust Memorial Day service in London, standing side by side, each holding a candle. The ceremony, to be fair, now that year carried double significance, marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp. It was a solemn moment, a moment of collective grief and collective remembrance, and the two of them were there for it, present and still and serious. It wasn't a glamorous photograph. It wasn't designed to impress anyone. It was simply two people, standing together, bearing witness to something that mattered. And for the people who had followed Catherine's illness with genuine concern and genuine love, seeing her there, standing, present, participating, felt like an exhale. She was back. Not just back at royal engagements, but back in the fullest sense. Back in the world. That January moment was deeply significant for another reason, too. Catherine had spoken publicly about her cancer recovery at the start of the year, and her words had been chosen with careful honesty. She had acknowledged that recovery is not a clean, straight line. She had said that adjusting to a new normal takes time. She had been real about it, in a way that royal figures do not always allow themselves to be real, and the public had responded to that realness with something close to devotion. So when the New Year photo collection opened with that January candle lighting image, it felt like a bookend. Here was where the year began, I guess in solemnity, in gratitude, but in the quiet act of showing up. February brought a very different image. This, I guess, one was from Catherine alone, without William, at HMP Styal, a women's prison in Cheshire. She had visited the facility to meet with former and current inmates who had been supported by Action for Children, a charity for which she serves as a royal patron. There are no cameras usually allowed inside prison walls. There's no red carpet rolled out for this kind of visit. No crowd waiting at the gates to wave and cheer. It is just work, and the quiet, consistent, unglamorous kind of work that makes up a large portion of what Catherine actually does when the world isn't watching. The fact that this image appeared in the personal collection she chose to share, this, and not something shinier, not something more obviously impressive, said something about her priorities that no press release could have communicated. This was a moment she valued, so a moment she wanted to remember. Plus, a moment she wanted people to know about. March brought another solo outing, the Irish Guard St. Patrick's Day Parade, which Catherine attended on her own, while William was occupied elsewhere. It is, to be fair, tradition she's upheld for years, appearing in green, smiling, handing out sprigs of shamrock to the soldiers lined up in their immaculate uniforms. There's something both formal and affectionate about the ceremony, by something very namely Irish, and very specifically military, and very specifically British, all at once. And Catherine moves through it with the kind of ease that only comes from years of practice and genuine fondness for the people she meets there. The image chosen for March captured that ease. It wasn't a stiff official photograph. It was a real moment from a real day, full of the particular warmth that she tends to generate when she's somewhere she feels comfortable. So April changed the register entirely. In April, William and Catherine made a personal journey together to the Isles of Mull and Iona, off the west coast of Scotland. This wasn't honestly a formal royal visit. There was, no official program, no list of engagements, no diplomatic purpose being served. It was a trip taken together, as a couple, to a place that's wild and beautiful and very far from the machinery of palace life. A Mull is an island of dramatic cliffs and green hills and small communities where people know each other by name. And Iona is smaller still, a place of ancient religious significance and extraordinary quiet, where the air feels different from anywhere else. They went there together. And the image that ended up in the collection wasn't taken at any formal stop along the way. It was a natural, unguarded moment. Two people who had been through an enormous amount, and side by side in a place that felt like it belonged to nobody and everybody at once. That image, more than almost anything else in the carousel, captured the private truth behind all the public appearances. These were, two real people. They had a real relationship. They needed real rest and real beauty just like anyone else. The detail that struck many people when they looked carefully at the 12 photographs was a particular one, and it says something interesting about how William and Catherine think about the line between their public lives and their private ones. Of the 12 images, only one featured any of their children, and even that one was specifically chosen for its public rather than personal significance. The family in the collection is almost entirely absent. George and kind of Charlotte and Louis, who millions of people across the world adore and follow with genuine affection, shall appear only at the edges of the story being told here. And this was entirely deliberate. These 12 photographs were a record of a working year, a portrait of two people doing their jobs, fulfilling their duties, showing up for the causes and the communities and the institutions that depend on them. It was a professional album, not a family scrapbook. The children, to be fair, who do appear in birthday photos and Christmas images and the occasional carefully selected moment, were given their privacy. This carousel wasn't for them. There's something quietly radical about that choice, actually, when you think about how most public figures in the modern era handle their children's images on social media. The temptation to use the children, who are objectively very charming, to generate likes and emotional responses is enormous, and the Wales family resists it with what appears to be iron consistency. Prince George, who is second in line to the throne and is now 12 years old, appeared in only one photograph in the entire carousel, and it was specifically because he was at an official public event rather than in a private family moment. He attended VE Day commemorations in May alongside his father, standing with veterans, learning history from the people who lived it. That appearance was sanctioned, in a sense, by its own significance. He, to be fair, is going to be king one day. The world needs to know his name and his face, and gradually his character. But Charlotte and Louis? They are still children in the fullest sense, still in the years before any of this becomes their responsibility. And their parents guard those years with the kind of protectiveness that's both instinctive and very clearly informed by everything William experienced growing up in the public eye without enough of that protection. May's image carried its own particular emotional weight. William and Prince George stood together among veterans at a ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of VE Day. The significance of the occasion was enormous. The last living witnesses to the Second World War are now in their late 90s and hundreds, and the chance to stand with them, to shake their hands, to look them in the eye and say thank you, is a chance that will not exist for much longer. That William was there was expected. That he brought George wasn't, and it created a ripple of feeling that went beyond the usual warm response to a royal appearance. Here was the future, standing alongside the past. Here was a 12-year-old boy looking up at men and women who were teenagers themselves when the world was on fire, who carried things that most people alive today will never have to carry. Royal observers noted that George was probably still getting used to moments like this, and still processing what it means to stand in a place like that, with cameras pointed at you and history arranged around you. But he was, there, which he showed up. And the image of him and his father side by side, talking with veterans, found its way into the personal collection that his parents chose to share with the world at the close of the year. These first months, TBH, of 2025, told a story of return. Of Catherine coming back, carefully, without rushing, on choosing engagements that meant something to her and to the people she was there to serve. Of William standing steady beside her, while also carrying his own considerable load of duties and causes and commitments. Of two people who had been through a genuine private crisis navigating its aftermath in public with a kind of grace that does not come automatically. It is practiced. It is chosen. It is, in its own way, a form of courage. Now, the New Year post arrived at the tail end of their Christmas break, interrupting whatever quiet celebrations they were having somewhere private. But it didn't feel like an interruption. It felt like a gift, and 12 photographs, one for each month, pulled out of the unseen archive of a year that had been harder and more meaningful than most. Shared not because, honestly, they had to be, but because they wanted to be. The caption said, "Favorites," and that word carried real weight. These pretty much were not selected by a communications team from a list of approved images. These were, moments they loved, moments that meant something to them personally. The candles at the Holocaust Memorial, the women at the prison, the quiet walk on a Scottish island, the boy standing with old soldiers in May sunshine. 12 frames from a year that changed them, offered freely to a world. That had been rooting for them through all of it. The summer months in the 2025 collection arrived with a different kind of energy entirely. Where the sort of earlier photographs had carried the quiet, deliberate weight of duty and recovery, June brought noise and color and the particular electricity of a great British tradition at its absolute peak. Trooping the Colour, held every June in London, she is one of those occasions when the full scale of what the British monarchy actually looks like in person becomes impossible to ignore. The streets fill with thousands of people who have sometimes traveled enormous distances too. Stand in the heat or the rain and catch 30 seconds of a passing procession. The horses are impeccably trained. The soldiers' uniforms are works of precision, which, and in the middle of it all, the royal family appear on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, and arranged in the specific way that royal families have been, arranging themselves for generations, looking out over a crowd that looks back at them with something that's hard to name, but unmistakable when you see it. For the Wales family, the 2025 Trooping the Colour carried a particular significance that separated it from all the ones before it. The photograph chosen for June showed William, Catherine, and all 3 of their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, together at the ceremony. And it was the only photograph in the entire New Year carousel that featured all 5 of them as a complete family unit. The reason that image hit so hard, the reason it appeared in their personal favorites at all, had everything to do with what the previous trooping had represented. In June 2024, Catherine had made her first major public appearance after months away recovering from cancer treatment. She had stood on that same balcony, thinner, quieter, but present, and the crowd's response had been overwhelming. People had wept openly in the street. Strangers had hugged each other. A woman who had been seriously ill, who had disappeared from public life at a moment of real vulnerability, had come back into the sunlight and waved. 2025 was different. In 2025, there was no shadow hanging over her. She was there the same way anyone who has survived something terrible is eventually. Just there again, fully, ordinarily, without the dramatic framing that illness attaches to everything. The family walked out together, and the children were the children, meaning that Louis in particular did whatever Louis felt like doing at any given moment, which has historically been a source of enormous national amusement. Charlotte stood close to her mother, as she tends to do, as though she's always quietly understood that her mother might sometimes need someone close. George stood with the particular combination of awareness and restraint that suggests a boy who has been paying very careful attention to what this moment requires of him. And William actually was there, holding the whole thing together in the way he always does, visible and steady. A royal insider had said around that time that the presence of the young royals at major events was genuinely important for the institution. Everyone loves a bit of positive news, the source hadn't. And if the family can brighten up people's days, that's worth doing. It sounds simple when you put it that way, but the truth behind it is more complicated and more human. What the Wales children actually provide when they appear at these events is not just a cute photograph. They provide continuity. They provide the unspoken assurance that all of this goes on, that the institution has a future, that the story does not end here. In a year when the royal family had faced more health scares and more institutional difficulties than most people could comfortably keep sort of track of, the sight of 3 healthy, growing children standing on a palace balcony was exactly that kind of quiet reassurance. July brought Wimbledon, and specifically, it brought an image of Catherine at Wimbledon that many people considered one of the defining photographs of her year. She's a tennis lover in a way that's clearly genuine rather than performed, a woman who grew up watching the championships and has been attending for years. And there was a time in the not-too-distant past when she would appear in the royal box, looking polished and delighted, and draw exactly the right amount of attention without making anyone feel overshadowed. In 2025, the July image in the New Year carousel showed her presenting the trophy to Janek. Sinner was the Italian champion who had won the men's final in what had been a gripping match. What the photograph captured was the warmth of that handoff, the genuine pleasure she took in being there, in being part of the moment, in playing her specific role in a tradition she genuinely loves. George, actually, and Charlotte had both been in the royal box watching the final with their parents, which was a lovely detail in itself. But the image chosen for the collection was Catherine's alone. Just her and the trophy and the joy of it. Princess Charlotte had her own Wimbledon moment during that tournament that people talked about for days. A moment when she stepped forward to receive a bouquet from one of the ball girls and handled it with a poise that would be impressive in a 30-year-old, let alone a 10-year-old, and yet somehow also managed to remain entirely and recognizably a child while doing it. That particular detail didn't make it into the 12-month collection, which was perhaps appropriate, since the collection was focused on William and Catherine's own professional year rather than their children's individual moments. But it colored the way people looked at the July photograph, knowing that Charlotte had been there, that the whole family had shared that afternoon. August and September shifted the tone toward the more formally diplomatic and globally significant, and September 2025 brought one of the most remarkable events in the royal calendar for that year, the state visit of U.S. President Donald Trump, his second such visit to the United Kingdom. State visits are among the most elaborate and carefully choreographed events that Buckingham Palace and the government stage together. They involve processions and banquets and the full weight of diplomatic theater and the people who participate in them are, in my opinion, they're required to do so with an attention to protocol that leaves very little room for spontaneity. The photograph that William and Catherine chose from Trump's state visit for their personal year-end collection showed Catherine in the moment of shaking the president's hand. The image wasn't-able for several reasons, not least because it sat so naturally alongside the more intimate moments in the rest of the carousel. This was the breadth of what they do. Standing in a prison, meeting women whose lives had been derailed. Standing on the world's largest diplomatic stage, shaking the hand of the most powerful political figure on earth. Both of those things were in the same 12 photographs, sharing space without explanation, just as they share space in the actual texture of a working royal year. William's own major international moment of 2025 came in November, and it produced what many people quietly considered the most striking single image in the entire collection. He traveled to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for 2 connected and enormous events, COP30, the major climate conference, and the Earthshot Prize ceremony. The Earthshot Prize is William's own creation, a project he conceived and built from the ground up, designed to identify and fund breakthrough solutions to the most pressing environmental problems facing the planet. He has spoken about it with a passion that's not performative, the kind of intensity that comes from someone who has stared at the world his children are going to inherit and felt genuine fear about it. In Rio, he stood in front of Christ the Redeemer, the enormous statue that sits above the city with its arms spread wide over everything below, and the photograph taken there became something more than a record of a royal visit. It echoed, almost painfully, on the famous photographs taken at the same spot by his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, decades earlier. The same statue, plus a different world, a different generation standing in the same place, carrying forward something that didn't die with her. He had told a journalist from Hello magazine that year, talking about the Earthshot Prize and the climate work. "I think constantly about the world my children will inherit." It was a simple statement, the kind that could have been boilerplate, but in context, it landed differently. He had spent years building this particular thing, this prize, this movement, and he was standing in Brazil at the end of a year in which his wife had come through cancer and his father was managing his own health challenges, and the photograph at Christ the Redeemer caught something of that weight. The posture, pretty much, the setting, the echo of Diana. It wasn't trying to be moving. It was just true. Truth has a way of being moving whether you try or not. While William was playing volleyball on the beach in Rio, which happened the day before the Earthshot Prize ceremony, as part of an appearance with local athletes, and which promptly became the image that everyone who saw it couldn't stop laughing about, because the Prince of Wales falling sideways in the sand, trying to get a ball, is simply one of the funniest things that happened in British public life all year. Back in England, when Charlotte had been traveling with her father to Switzerland in a different capacity entirely, the Lionesses, England's women's football team, were competing in the Women's European Championships, and William, as a deeply committed football fan, who also happens to be the president of the Football Association, was there with his daughter to cheer them on. England won. William was caught on camera congratulating the team with a genuine delight that hadn't thing ambassadorial about it. Charlotte, now watching from the stands, was smiling in the way that 10-year-olds smile when they're watching something that's actually genuinely exciting, not because they have been told to smile, but because the thing is actually thrilling. October brought another moment that had its own particular historical dimension. William appeared alongside King Charles at the Countdown to COP30 event, held at the Natural History Museum in London. The two of them together, father and son, I positioned outside one of the great museums of the world with its extraordinary Victorian Gothic facade and its extraordinary contents, dinosaur bones and ancient rocks and the evolutionary history of life on Earth, posed for photographs before going inside to meet government leaders and advocates working on climate solutions. The image was formal, but not stiff. There was something in it about succession, about continuity, about a father and son who have not always had an easy relationship, finding a shared purpose in the work that genuinely matters to both of them. King Charles has spent 50 years making the environmental case before it was fashionable or politically safe to do so. William inherited that concern and built Earthshot from it. The October photograph was a quiet record of that lineage. And then there was the image from December, which became, for many people, the unofficial mascot of the entire New Year carousel, the one image that was impossible to look at without smiling. William was photographed at the Welsh Guards' Christmas party at Combermere Barracks in Windsor, where he serves as colonel of the regiment. He was laughing, genuinely laughing, with a pint in his hand, surrounded by soldiers who were also laughing, and the whole image had a quality that official royal photographs almost never manage to achieve. It looked like fun, not polished fun, not choreographed warmth, but actual, authentic, slightly undignified in the best possible way fun. The heir to the throne with beer and mates and a laugh that appeared to come from somewhere real. It was the last image in the collection, and in that position, it functioned almost like a punchline, or like. The final, to be fair, shot of a film that has been through a great deal and ends on a note of uncomplicated happiness. What the summer and autumn photographs of 2025 are taken together actually told was a story about range. The range of what these two people are required to be, and the range of what they genuinely seem to want to be. They move between solemnity and laughter, between global diplomacy and village hall intimacy, between the most formal occasions the British state can produce and the most informal moments their own personalities can generate. The Holocaust memorial candles and the volleyball collapse. The prison visit, I think, and the Wimbledon trophy, the Christ the Redeemer photograph, and the Welsh Guards Christmas beer. It is not a contradiction, it is not a performance, and it is just a life lived at an unusual scale with an unusual set of responsibilities by two people who are, in the end, exactly as complicated and warm and imperfect and real as anyone else. The 12 photographs said all of that without saying any of it explicitly. By the time the New Year post had been live for a full day, the response had become something that palace communications teams quietly note and never quite manage to engineer on purpose. It was organic, it was emotional, and it was people all over the world looking at these 12 images and feeling, very specifically, the particular kind of feeling that comes from caring about someone you've never met, watching them go through something genuinely hard, and then seeing them come out the other side of it still standing, still working, and still laughing at themselves in the sand while trying to play volleyball in Brazil. The post was theirs, but the feelings it generated belonged to everyone. There's a specific kind of silence that follows something unexpected and beautiful. And on the morning of New Year's Day 2026, millions of people who had stayed up to welcome the new year and found the carousel in their feeds experienced a version of that silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of being genuinely moved and needing a moment before you say anything. Then the comments came, the likes came, the shares came, and the internet did what it does, turned the feeling into noise. But underneath all that noise was something that persisted, something that the number of likes and the volume of the comment section couldn't fully contain. It was the sense that something had genuinely been given, because the photographs were not just a roundup of royal engagements. They were not a press release with better lighting. They sort of were, in the simplest and most meaningful sense, a gift from two people to the world that had been watching them and worrying about them and loving them through a genuinely difficult season. And the world, it turned out, wanted very badly to receive it. The response to the New Year post did something revealing about the particular place William and Catherine occupy in the public imagination right now, in this specific moment of their lives. The post collected over 300,000 likes, which is a significant number in the abstract, but becomes genuinely remarkable when you put it into context. King Charles and Queen Camilla also marked the new year with a social media post. Theirs was a unique animation, carefully produced and appropriately celebratory. Their post, I guess, received around 100,000 likes. William and Catherine's post received 3 times as many. This is not a competition, and it would be wrong to frame it as one. But the gap is worth sitting with for a moment, because it tells you something true about where public affection is concentrated in the British royal family right now. The reasons for that are not complicated, and people understand instinctively that William and Catherine are the future, that one day they'll be king and queen, that the children growing up at Adelaide Cottage and now at Forest Lodge, their new home on the Windsor estate to which the family moved in November 2025, will carry this institution forward into a century that's already making enormous demands on every inherited structure. But it is more than just the future thing. It is the fact that people went through something with Catherine. Her cancer, basically, diagnosis and treatment unfolded in its broad outlines, in public. Not by her choice, not in the way celebrities sometimes choose to share medical information for attention or sympathy, but because she's a public figure in a way that makes total privacy genuinely impossible. And because, when she finally decided to tell her own story, she told it in a way that was so personal and so unguarded that it broke through whatever professional distance usually exists between royalty and the public. She described nature as her sanctuary during treatment. She spoke about the slowness of recovery, about adjusting to a new normal, about learning what it means to exist on the other side of something that could have ended differently. These are not royal things to say. These are human things to say, which and humans, it turns out, respond to human things with human feeling. By, I guess, the time the New Year photos arrived, there was a very large number of people in the world who felt, and with a sincerity that hadn't anything to do with celebrity culture or tabloid gossip, that they had a stake in how Catherine was doing. That they, I think, had been part of the story, in the small way that witnesses are always part of the stories they observe. The photographs, with their record of a full, active, joyful, purposeful year, were the answer to a question a lot of people had been carrying quietly. She was fine. Plus, more than fine. She was back, to be fair. And the year had been, in her own word, brilliant. What the specific selection of photographs also did, in ways that people who analyze royal communications noted carefully, was draw a very clear and deliberate line. The 12 images were a portrait of their professional year. They showed William and Catherine in their roles as members of the working royal family, at memorials, at engagements, at international events, at charity visits, at formal ceremonies. The children appeared only at the edges, and even then only in officially sanctioned contexts. The family scrapbook, the private Catherine, and the private William, who are parents first and royals second, was kept precisely where they choose to keep it, off the record. What was offered was the record of a working life, offered with warmth and humor and genuine personality, but still a working life. The line between public and private was maintained even in this gesture of apparent openness. That distinction matters more than it might seem. There's a persistent, to be fair, public hunger for more of the children, for more unguarded moments, for the kind of access that social media has conditioned people to expect from everyone, including people who didn't agree to be fully transparent in exchange for attention. William and Catherine have simply decided not to feed that hunger beyond what they're comfortable with, and the New Year carousel was, among other things, a very elegant example of how to be warm and open and generous with your public, while still holding the line on the things you've decided are not for sharing. The children exist in the images as presences. George's VE Day, appearance with his father. Charlotte's smile at the Lionesses match in Switzerland. Louis and Catherine together at the Christmas Carol concert in December. But none of these are intimate moments. None of them are glimpses behind a door that was meant to be closed. They are appearances at public events, which is, of course, exactly what they're. The December image of Catherine and Louis at the Together at Christmas Carol service was in its own way one of the most quietly affecting photographs in the collection. The carol service is Catherine's own project, a gathering she organizes every year at Westminster Abbey that brings together people from all walks of life to celebrate Christmas and to shine a light on causes and communities that she cares about. And it, in my opinion, was broadcast on Christmas Eve and watched by millions. Louis, her youngest, was there beside her, and the photograph captured a sideways glance between the two of them that had the quality of something private, that had accidentally been visible in public, not intimate in the revealing sense, just intimate in the small, ordinary sense of a mother and her youngest child sharing a moment in a place that's, whatever else it is, also their home territory, their tradition, in their specific joy. The carol service that year, as in previous years, celebrated love in all its forms. That theme, which Catherine chose, is one she returns to because it is genuinely what she cares about. Her work through the Royal Foundation's Center for Early Childhood, which also appeared in the New Year collection, is rooted in the same conviction that the early years of a child's life, the quality of care and love and stability they receive in those years, shapes everything that comes after. She talks about this with a focus and a consistency that goes beyond talking points. She visited prisons to understand how broken families contribute to reoffending. She visited early childhood settings to understand what support looks like when it is working and what gaps exist when it is not. She built an entire research and advocacy infrastructure around the idea that the first 5 years of life matter more than most people understand. The photograph from the Center for Early Childhood Engagement was in the collection not because it was visually spectacular, but because it represented something that genuinely drives her. The warmth of the New Year post, the sense of giving something personal and real, extended to that image too. Royal observers who spent time analyzing the 12 photographs as a complete set arrived at similar conclusions from different directions. They noted that the collection functioned simultaneously as a personal memory album and as a public statement about identity and purpose. They noted the absence of the younger children as a deliberate and principled choice rather than an oversight. They noted the emphasis on duty and engagement alongside the moments of humor and joy. They noted the way William's photograph from Brazil, standing before Christ the Redeemer, seemed to contain within itself a whole history of memory and inheritance and continuity. And they noted, almost universally, that the caption was exactly right. Some unseen favorites from 2025, not a grand declaration, not a curated brand message, plus just the honest description of what it was. Moments they loved, pulled from a year they were grateful for, shared with people who had shared it with them from a distance. What nobody mentioned, because it does not lend itself easily to analysis, is the thing that made all of it work. The thing that made the internet react the way it did, that made people in Argentina and India and small English towns feel something real at the sight of 12 photographs posted on the last day of December. That thing was trust. Plus, not political trust, not institutional trust, but the simpler and harder to manufacture kind, the trust that comes from watching someone be honest in a difficult moment and then watching them keep showing up. Catherine earned a particular form of public trust through her illness and through the way she handled it, not perfectly, not without missteps, but with a fundamental honesty about what she was going through that people recognized and responded to. William has been building a version of the same trust for years through his climate work and his mental health advocacy, and his willingness to say, publicly, that his own mental health hasn't always been a straightforward thing to manage. The trust existed before December 30th. The 12 photographs just lived inside it, which the new year arrived the following day, and with it came a wave of news that had nothing to do with warm photographs and emotional comment sections. A terrorist attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day killed a number of people, and among the victims was Edward Pettifer, a young man whose family had a long connection to the royal household. He was the stepson of Alexandra Pettifer, known as Tiggy Lega Bork, who had been a beloved nanny and close companion to William and Harry during their childhood years. William and Catherine responded immediately before the day was out, posting a message to their social media accounts. "To Catherine and I've been shocked and saddened by the tragic death of Ed Pettifer," William wrote. "Our thoughts and prayers remain with the Pettifer family and all those innocent people who have been tragically impacted by this horrific attack." It was the right response, made swiftly, with no hedging and no careful PR calculation, and it said something about the kind of people they're beyond the frames of carefully chosen photographs. Or when something real and terrible happened on the doorstep of a new year they had just publicly welcomed, they didn't stay quiet, and they didn't stay distant. They were just present, in the only way they could be. The year ended and began like that, in the space of 48 hours, with beauty and then grief, with the warmth of 12 remembered moments, and then the cold fact of a violent death, with the private celebrations of a family somewhere in England, and then the public responsibility that does not pause for private celebrations. This is, in many ways, what being them actually means. The photographs showed one version of it, the color and the light and the volleyball falls and the candles and the laugh over a Christmas pint. The New Year message showed another version, the immediacy of real loss, the public role that does not clock out. Both versions are true. And both versions are real, and both versions are, in the end, part of the same story about two people who are doing something genuinely difficult, with more grace than it probably looks like from the outside. The fans who flooded the comment section on December 30th were responding to the photographs, yes, but also to the accumulated weight of a year they had spent watching. They had watched Catherine come back. They had watched, to be fair, William stand in front of Christ the Redeemer and think about his children's futures. They had watched George stand with old soldiers. They had watched Charlotte at Wimbledon and at a football match and at a Christmas carol service. They had watched a family move through an enormous year without falling apart, without losing their sense of humor, without losing the thread of what they were there to do. And on basically the last night of that year, only two people interrupted their family holiday to say thank you, to say brilliant, to say looking forward, to share 12 small windows into something that had been, by any honest measure, hard-won and deeply real. The post stayed up, and the likes kept coming. Someone from Argentina was still in the comment section the following morning. The new year was already a day old, already carrying its own news and its own grief and its own surprises. And the photographs sat there, warm and quiet, and exactly what they were. 12 pieces of a year, chosen with love, offered with both hands, and received exactly that way by a world that had been waiting to say, simply and with great feeling, "Welcome back."